Hi, I'm Maribeth Quinn, a mixed media artist from Nashville, Tennessee, and I paint with paper. And I'm guessing that you're interested in painting with paper, or at least a little curious since you wanted to download the Collage Kit. I've been exploring this medium for several years now, and I can tell you that there are endless ways that you can incorporate this into your work. My goal with this starter kit is to introduce you to this medium in a way that not only sparks your imagination, but gives you a starting place with some really good resources so that that first step doesn't feel like you're walking into a void. So let's begin with an explanation of what painting with paper actually is. Painting with paper is a visual art technique involving papers of different types as the primary medium. Personally, I use layers of paper, mostly homemade, and almost always with some level of transparency, along with a bit of paint and some mixed media to create texture and luminous color on the surface. I suppose I came to this like many artists do, just attaching bits of paper here and there to the surfaces of my paintings, but over time, I began to add more and more until I was finally covering almost the entire surface with layers of paper. Since most of the papers are transparent to some degree, the layers build up and seem to create almost a window that you can peer down into and see everything that came before. They reflect, blend, interact with one another so that it can be hard to see where one piece of paper ends and the other begins. This varied and interesting surface provides so much room for interpretation, expression, and experimentation. When you consider that tearing up little bits of paper and gluing them to the surface will eventually, with enough layers, lose their disconnected aspects and become something cohesive, harmonious, and whole, well, that's just an amazing allegory for life. I can now see why it appealed to me as an art form. I began working with this process at a time when I was also trying to process some really big emotions like grief, loss, and natural life transitions. Collage gave me a very tactile engagement with these incredibly mysterious forces and energies, and I found over time that it helped me heal and integrate in ways that I couldn't manage otherwise. This type of collage is varied and ready to be explored by you. It can be a wonderful addition to many art styles, techniques, and projects that you might be working on. And working with paper as your primary medium can show you new ways to blend, balance, and create interest in your work, regardless of what the focus of that work is. So let's get started with my basic supply list and look at what these products and materials actually do. Of course, you can use many additional supplies, but I wanted to provide this simpler and more manageable starter kit to set you on your way without overwhelm so you can begin layering paper. So let's talk about paint. I recommend picking 3 colors plus black and white. When you limit your available colors like this to only 3, what you mix will oftentimes include a bit of all 3 of them, and the harmony that results from this is quite noticeable. Mixing with this limited color palette also teaches you a lot about how many colors you can make from just 3 choices. The addition of the black and white allows you to take all of those combinations and create many shades and tints as well. Constraining your paint colors allows you to create color blends that you may have never seen before and certainly won't find right out of the tube. I use these colors I mix to add a base layer of paint to my substrate as I begin, and then I will also frequently use those same colors to make my homemade collage papers. I listed 3 colors in my basic list that I use a lot: magenta, Indian yellow, and cerulean blue. I love to use these together frequently, but you can choose any 3 that you like, constraining down to just 3 colors plus black and white, and then using them for both the base paint layer and your homemade collage papers creates incredible resonance between the paint layer and your paper layers. I make many of my own collage papers by tinting either tissue, rice, or tea bag paper. I only listed tissue paper in my basic supply list because it's best to just start with less and get a feel for what that's like. Then when you're ready, you can easily branch out and search for tea bag or rice paper from your favorite art retailer. I believe I also have links to both of these on my free PDF, My Favorite Art Supplies and Materials. You can download that on the artist resource page on my website. I tint the tissue paper with various versions of acrylic, such as high flow acrylics, acrylic ink, and acrylic paint. When you work with the different kinds of paper, you realize that they have different qualities. All three of the papers that I mentioned, tissue, rice, and tea bag, have some level of transparency, and they also have their own levels of absorbing pigment, affecting how vivid or soft they may be. They also have their own textures, as well as a way of performing. In my class, Learning to Paint with Paper, I teach you the entire process of how you can make your own collage papers, and this process can be used with each of these types of paper. I also used manufactured papers. Mulberry paper, for instance, is a personal favorite because of its rich color and consistent color distribution. It's a wonderful contrast to the homemade papers whose imperfections and marks make each one unique. Decoupage printed paper is also another favorite. Other printed papers might be found in places like shoe boxes or from stores where you purchase clothing. When you really begin to look around for papers, you see just how many there are already in your home. So let's talk about what to use for a substrate when you're just starting out. Paper is a wonderful substrate to begin exploring collage. It's economical and therefore very low pressure, which I think is very important. And it can be cut down to whatever size makes you feel most comfortable. I use Strathmore 184-pound paper because it's a heavier weight paper made to withstand all that goes along with mixed media. You can use thinner paper, but you will likely experience some instability with it and be frustrated maybe by its tendency to curl or bubble under the weight of the paper and the moisture. This is why I recommend the thicker mixed media paper. I use a wide range of mixed media materials, but I've listed only 2 in my basic supplies list because I use these the most. Tempera paint sticks are vibrant, creamy, fun to handle, and are perfect for making initial marks on your painting, as well as those pops of color in the select areas as you get near the conclusion of the process. And next are the Neocolor Caran d'Ache water-soluble crayons. These are some of my favorite mark-making tools for little flourishes added to the surface at the end. They blend and run when water's added to them, but left dry, they perform very similar to the crayons that you might remember from childhood, except these are loaded with pigment. Both of these products are just pure fun. I included a silicone mat in my supplies list because staining papers and using a lot of medium to adhere the paper can be a little bit messy sometimes. The silicone protects whatever surface you're working on, and it also doesn't absorb the paint, so it leaves that paint there so it all ends up actually on your papers. It simply looks like this. It can roll up very easily. As you can see, this is the side where I stain my papers. There are various adhesives and mediums that are suitable for collage, and the texture and substance and weight of the objects that you are working with for collage, they'll determine to a large degree which of these that you want to use. For longevity, you want to choose an adhesive that is sure to stand up over time. But for my basic supply list, I included only one. I use Golden's glazing medium for almost everything, and it works wonderfully with these delicate papers. It's thin, it doesn't pull or tear the papers. It's also fluid and very binding. It doesn't color or cloud, and the glazing medium will also thin out my paint so that I can easily use one medium for both an adhesive and to produce a glaze. Some of my favorite qualities are that it doesn't make my fingers sticky and icky like some of those glues and pastes will. It also blends seamlessly with the surrounding paint and doesn't have an overly glossy sheen when dry. So there's my basic supply list, and it should be able to get you started experimenting with painting with paper. I admit to always having had some fascination with transparent layers. When I first began working with oils, it was the glazes that captured my imagination. Then when I moved to acrylics, I wanted to see if I could create some of those same effects. And I worked for years layering diluted acrylic paint over a highly textured gesso base. I also love painting with watercolors. So when I discovered collage with transparent papers, I was immediately hooked. Here are some of my favorite things about layering with papers. Layering creates depth, dimension, as well as emotion and texture. Using transparent papers allows me to blend what's happening on the surface. Paint is usually more opaque, whereas semi-transparent papers allows me to add layers that all work together, creating effects and texture that I could not duplicate with paint alone. Layering is impossible to predict, which is something I love about this technique. It requires an adventurous and curious spirit, as well as trust in the process. I'm always looking for ways to train myself to trust the process, not just in my art practice, but in life. We're always, to some degree, working with unknown and unpredictable variables. So finding ways to work with what's happening instead of being stuck with what we wish was happening, well, this is just an incredible and valuable life skill that I could use more of. Working with collage has taught me things about design elements that I just hadn't been able to learn with paint alone. The design principles are always the same, of course, and there was something about working with tangible pieces of paper that helped me to better understand what elements were weak spots for me. It also helped me to find new ways to understand and improve in these areas. Because tinted pieces of paper won't blend together like paint will, you have to learn to work with the transparencies and figure out how to create blends, balance, and use contrast, working solely with the layers. This will teach you a lot about these concepts. Creating harmony in your color palette will be enhanced as you use semi-transparent papers, and they blend together to create luminous color. So here's an example of a color palette that is analogous. They're all next to each other on the color wheel. This always creates a very soothing and calm painting because everything is so closely related. This might be another example of using papers with an analogous color palette where they're all very close to each other on the color wheel. It's very calm and soothing. Here's an example of a complementary color palette. As you see, the green and the purple are opposite one another on the color wheel, so there's going to be a lot of energy between these two colors. So when you pick out some green papers and pair them with some purple papers, you're going to get a lot of energy with that combination. So here's an example of a lot of contrast. You have this very light area here, right up against this dark area. It creates a lot of wonderful tension there. You have a bit of that going on right down here too. Very dark area, right next to a very light area in general. Here's another example of some nice contrast is between these light and very dark areas. They really catch your attention and draw your eye. So balance and composition are big areas of growth for me. I'm personally still looking for my feet on this. I'm trying to balance out the busy areas like this with the quieter areas like this, where you can allow it to have that balance, allow people's eyes to rest in certain areas. And working with paper has helped me immensely to figure out when to do that, how to do that. And so I'm really a work in progress on that. But working with paper will definitely teach you because each piece is this tactile one piece that you can put there. And so you really have to make choices and you get to see the results of those choices. A great example of a focal point would be this bird that's down here in the bottom right corner. For the whole painting, there's a lot of quiet space, and then you have that very distinct focal point. Here's an example of how I made a focal point just by using the Caran d'Ache crayons. It was just a darker area with my papers, and I simply put some lines around it to make the focal point of a flower. On this painting, an example of finishing touches would be those marks that I made around those leaf structures with just the Caran d'Ache water-soluble crayons. Very subtle, but when you get up close, they're very interesting to look at. They don't show up very much from far away, which I like. And then when you move in closely, you see that there's more to explore. So how can you begin exploring this technique? First, begin to experiment with paper as your medium. One great resource for this is my YouTube channel. I have so many videos showing the process of layering that you can experiment with. And I use the word experiment for a reason. An experiment is simply an exercise. It's not a painting. Attempting to create a painting you like right from the start is likely to set you up for disappointment or frustration. However, if your only goal is to work with the paper, learn how it behaves, and investigate how to use the materials, then you are far more likely to begin gaining some skill and knowledge so that when you eventually go to make a painting, you have the skill to do so. The learning process is an inescapable part of the creative process, and it seems that many times we artists zero in on that last stage of creating paintings as if it's the only stage. But I've found that with no or low expectations at first and given time to learn and grow, the painting stage emerges naturally because it's time. So enjoy this part of the process. Exploring, experimenting, even learning through failure can be an enjoyable part of being creative. But these things will never be enjoyable if the expectation to make something attractive is present right from the start. Next, actively search your environment for papers that you might want to include and see how they perform. You can learn a lot about certain products online, but even better than Googling things sometimes is just getting in there and trying the things. I constantly have paintings going that are solely for the purpose of trying new materials together, purposely creating disasters, and sometimes finding things that work so beautifully that they immediately make it into my current work. It isn't always about making beautiful paintings. A healthy art practice has a lot of practice in it. So find different papers and practice with them. Next, contemplate what you might want to convey with this medium. For example, in my work, I explore ideas of fragility and the temporality of life, the concept of unity actually being made of many tiny parts, and also the order that can shine through what appears to be chaos on the surface. Working with paper is a natural vehicle of expression for me to explore these concepts. Also, remember to allow for the process to be messy, chaotic, and disjointed for the majority of the time that you work with it. The layering process is not something that comes together immediately or even quickly. So learning to enjoy the process instead of looking exclusively for the end result right from the start is a great spiritual practice that has incredible practical uses in daily life as well as your artistic development. And if you're really wanting to jump ahead in your understanding of how to work with this process, then you can enroll in my class, Introduction to Collage, Learning to Paint with Paper. There will be a link to info about the class as well as the enrollment page in your Collage Kit. But I'd like to read you just a couple of reviews I've received from people that have taken the class. Beth says, This course introduced me to a wonderful experience with collage. Maribeth is a teacher that takes you through the steps, explaining the concept and inspiring you as an artist to grow. Everything I wanted and more. Anne says, Maribeth has me wanting to get back into my art room again without dread. Her class is wonderful and exactly what I needed. She's encouraging and has me believing that I can do this. Anna Marie says, making and working with painted tissue paper in wonderful, often unexpected colors is fun and inspiring. It's a brilliant way to learn to play again and reconnect to our inner creative self. I would absolutely love it if you join me in the class. It's pre-recorded and you can learn at your own pace. You have access to go through it as many times as you'd like. There are 24 lessons where I teach you in real time how to paint using layers of paper. And then every 2 to 3 weeks, we have a live Q&A call where you can ask me any questions you might have. If you can't make it to the call, there's always a playback recording so you don't ever miss a thing. If you like to share your work, we have a private Facebook group where the students of the class not only share their work with one another, but also information, resources, compliments, and encouragement. I hope you allow me to take you a little bit further down this interesting and exciting road of painting with paper. I know you will love it. Thanks for downloading the Collage Kit. I hope you found it to be really helpful to get you started on this wonderful journey of painting with paper. Happy painting.